my last medical school interview when I was president of Jefferson in 2022, about a 31-year-old student comes up to me and she says, President Klasko, I have to talk to you before you leave. I said, well, it's about tuition. I'm leaving. She goes, no, you delivered me 31 years ago at Sacred
Wow.
Heart Hospital in Allentown, Pennsylvania. So, to me, it was the ideal specialty of very technical, very analytic, very specialized in some respects, especially with high risk obstetrics, but also really in some respects having relationships for life.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for listening to another episode of our podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Dr. Steve Klasko, Executive in Residence of General Catalyst. Steve is somewhat of a horse whisperer between the traditional world of academic medicine and the new world of digital health and entrepreneurial startups. He's been a dean, a CEO, and a university president, and now he advises the country's largest investor in digital health. Steve, thank you for chatting with me today.
Great to be with you.
Yeah, awesome. Before we dive any deeper, could you tell us a bit about yourself?
The one thing you didn't mention, I actually started my career as a DJ, which actually is a full circle to 2024, because my latest book is called Feeling All Right, How the Message and the Music Can Make Healthcare Healthier. 50 songs that will define the new healthcare. And, won't surprise you. The first chapter is Courage to Change by Sia. Second chapter is Keep the Customer Satisfied by Simon and Garfunkel. So I have had a somewhat non-traditional career. I'm an obstetrician. I did my residency in a 2-resident-a-year community program, so the chances of my becoming an assistant instructor at Jefferson, let alone their president CEO, probably would have been 0 back then. And just literally left my private practice because I got tired of predominantly male obstetricians talking about how hysterectomies and C-sections are okay. And, was the first start of my, hey, I can change this. So I went into academics looking at the psychological effects of hysterectomy, then went out to Houston Laser Institute and got a couple patents on what we now use to avoid hysterectomy. Through a series of events, became a chair of an academic department, a dean of 3 different medical schools, including one called University of South Florida, which interestingly is not in South Florida. It's in Northwest Florida, Tampa. But we did some real interesting things. I'm a pilot, and every 2 years I have to get my technical competence assessed, but nobody had ever assessed my technical competence as a surgeon. So you're a lot safer flying with me in Tampa than being operated by me in Tampa. So we created the largest simulation center, actually partnered with Sheba Medical Center out in Israel, which has actually one of the largest simulation centers in the world. And then through a series of events, I was asked through a national search to become the first in their history single campus leader for Thomas Jefferson University and Jefferson Health in 2013. Built that up from a 1-hospital, 1-campus university to an 18-hospital, 2-campus university with an insurance company. So we became the first integrated delivery and financial system in Philadelphia. And I merged a 200-year-old health science university with the number 3 design university in the country, bringing an MD master's in design together. People accuse me of taking my personal life into my professional life because my wife is the associate publisher of Vogue. So, literally fashion design and health were in our DNA. And then through Jefferson, I had a serendipitous meeting with Hemant in Asia to get to the final piece, the CEO of General Catalyst, who had just written a book called Unscaled. And our first conversation is, Steve, you're like the opposite of Unscaling. You've gone from 2 hospitals to 18 hospitals, from $1 billion to $10 billion. But everything you talk about is healthcare at any address and not hospital-based. So that's what we're moving toward. When I left Jefferson, it just was a natural fit to become part of General Catalyst ecosystem. And that's what I do now. I'm also a chair of the board of a New York Stock Exchange medical device company called Teleflex, and I'm on the board of Avia, which is a very large consulting company. And I help lead global innovation for the largest health system in Israel.
There's a lot to unpack there. Thank you for sharing. I didn't know about the DJ, so maybe we'll start there. So you started was that your first job, kind of coming?
Yeah. That was no, out of my university. That was my major, was broadcast journalism. Got a job. I was young. I didn't follow a lot of rules. I broke a rule. My first job was a midnight to 5 DJ. My middle name is Kent. I was little Stevie Kent. And my minor was chemistry because I have this photographic type brain. And in a weird way, I went back and I said, what am I going to do to Lehigh? And they said, well, you're not going to be a DJ. And in a weird way, you've taken enough chemistry courses. You could take the med cats and get become a doctor. Why would I want to do that? Well, because you're going to need a job. Good point. So the very quick last part of that story is the reason I got into med school was because of my DJ world. As it turns out, my first interview in Philadelphia did not go well. My second interview at Hahnemann Medical College, the interviewer was an OBGYN. They come in a lot from midnight to 5. I was a midnight to 5 DJ. He looked at my little one pager and saw I was little Stevie Kent. He goes, "Oh my God, you're little Stevie? I've almost missed some deliveries listening to your story.
That's crazy.
It'd be so cool to have you come to our medical school." And they gave me an admission 2 weeks later. So.
Talk about diversity, hiring DJs into the medical schools. I love it. And then what attracted you to obstetrics?
I always thought I'd be a really good surgeon. And that's what I love doing. But the problem sometimes with surgical specialties is you don't really have that relationship with patient.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, I didn't really want to be a family doctor and internist because I have more of a mindset of I like to solve crossword puzzles and stuff. I want to fix this and, have it done. So the combination of people think about obstetrics, good or bad, where you're at in 9 months or something around 9 months. And it's one of those things where you get to, really use your technical skills and your analytic skills. But in many cases, you're with that patient their whole life. My last medical school interview when I was president of Jefferson in 2022, about a 31-year-old student comes up to me and she says, President Klasko, I have to talk to you before you leave. I said, well, it's about tuition. I'm leaving. She goes, no, you delivered me 31 years ago at Sacred Heart Hospital in Allentown, Pennsylvania. So, to me, it was the ideal specialty of very technical, very analytic, very specialized in some respects, especially with high-risk obstetrics, but also really, in some respects, having relationships for life.
So you're practicing
literally.
OB doc, starting out in Philadelphia.
In Allentown, Pennsylvania, actually.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah,
Allentown from the famous Billy Joel song. And then from there, what draws you into academics, right? Taking kind of the jump from a practicing physician to being an academic. Is that kind of that cerebral side of you was pulling you there?
Most of my life has not been well thought out. I mean, it's worked out pretty well, but it's been really opportunistic. So I've done nothing academically. I happen to be listening to, as I remember him, a very old male OBGYN. This was like in 1985, talking about hysterectomy and C-section. Actually, he was probably my age now that I think about it, which is a little depressing. But and I just realized that what we were teaching these kids was just wrong. And I took about an 80% pay cut, didn't know what I was going to be doing, but went into sort of an academic pursuit around what are the psychological and sexual effects of hysterectomy and some of the women's health thing. Actually did a startup company in the 80s called Spirit of Women, because back then, believe it or not, Ohad, now we talk about women's health, that didn't exist. Mm-hmm. It was everybody had, ovarian centers or, uteri centers, or
it was by organ, not by.
But in fact, when we were in stealth mode, we called the company NJRO, not just reproductive organs. Mm-hmm. The concept of the company was pretty simple. It's pre-computer, but it was, women are actually these sentient beings that do have some of those organs between the waist and the knees, but actually have many, many other needs. So we became sort of a one-stop shop where hospitals could contract with us and create a women's health program, everywhere from heralding, under-recognized women in their community to providing a full women's health program. We sold that company. It was also, again, a recognition of mine early on in my career that traditional medicine does not have it all figured out. Mm-hmm. And if you're willing to be creative and maybe a little crazy, you can come up with something that a lot of people like. So I just built up an academic career around that and doing some work around umbilical cord stem cells and just some really interesting, very futuristic things. And then got very into the technical stuff. I started one of the first digital health entities with Palm Pilot, the company that owned Palm Pilot. For those of you who are under 70, it was one of the first PDAs. And then worked at Apple for a year as their first advisor around digital health in 2009.
So it actually sounds like there was nothing academic about your academic career. It was all very
it really was. But it got me, at that time, because a lot of the entrepreneurial and tech stuff I was doing was on behalf of education and research, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, one of the first papers I did was we still had to, as residents, write down every procedure we did. Well, I said that's ridiculous in the age of quote computers in the 90s, and created one of the first things where they could just input it and it would automatically keyword it and that kind of thing. Again, I feel embarrassed to say that now, but that was a real innovation. So people wanted me on their faculty because A, I was young, which again might be hard to believe for some younger tech listeners, but I was, and B, I was an academic physician, practicing physician, but talking, and really doing something in tech.
And then from there, you take another turn, though. You go into administration and management. And that's often, like I joke with a lot of the guests on this podcast, to say that's kind of moving to the dark side, right? Because you were hands-on, kind of fixing the system with your own hands. And now you're taking on fixing it with a completely different tool set and skill set. What compelled you to make that jump?
Again, I'd love to tell you that this was all planned out. It had nothing to do with that. I was delivering babies in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I was associate chair at Penn State University College of Medicine. And Allentown College of St. Francis de Sales, probably you've never heard of them, was doing an MBA thing for doctors. I said, that might be fun. I don't know why I wouldn't want to do that. And I got rejected. I got rejected because I graduated Lehigh University in 3 years, with 2 majors. I never took even an Echo 101. So they wanted me to take like 5 pre-courses. I happened, again, serendipitously, to be with the Dean of Wharton at an orchestra benefit in Philadelphia. And I go to him, probably not a great intro, but I said, I just got rejected by Allentown College's MBA program. If I went to your school, what's that called, Wharton at University of Pennsylvania, would you reject me because I hadn't taken any undergraduate eco or accounting courses? And he looked at me a little weirdly and he said, no, I don't think that would be the reason we rejected you.
There might be others.
Exactly. That was implied. So, that became a challenge. I applied to Wharton, took the GMATs, and got in.
Mm-hmm.
And that became my lifeline, honestly, Ohad. That study group, we've gotten together twice a year for 20 years.
Awesome.
Did that in 1994. Alex Skorsky, the former CEO of J&J, Terrence Hahn, the former COO of Honeywell, Bert Bruce from Pfizer. This has become literally my core group in almost everything I do. So it wasn't necessarily the courses, it was the network. And that led to, again, a serendipitous Allegheny Health System had just gone bankrupt. It was the largest medical school bankruptcy in history in Philadelphia. Tenet had taken over the hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
What was that Animal House line? Young, brash, and naive or something. And just wrote to the head of Tenet, "You need me," because it was a for-profit health system and this, university that never done medical school, and turned out that the medical school needed me more than Tenet, and they asked me to become vice dean, and then eventually became dean. So again, I get back to, I was a private practice OBGYN. I was an entrepreneur. Dean was not on the list of.
Mm-hmm.
I had a better chance of being a forest ranger than being a dean, but because of this once in a lifetime bankruptcy, and because of that for-profit and very entrepreneurial president of Drexel, Taki Papadakis, they thought that I'd make a lot of sense. And, then I became dean and was very successful in that role. So that led me on the dean path, as a typical, not very typical, academic medical school dean.
And how different is that now, changing? Again, I alluded to the fact that, you've got a different tool set now as a healthcare leader, as an administrator, right? You don't have the speed and the pace of your own practice, of being an entrepreneur, of being a startup driver. But all of a sudden you have to think about system change. You have to think about how to motivate people and kind of move this Titanic, right? The glacier's coming and you got control of the wheel, and like, how do you move that? How different is that being in that chair?
It's a great question. I think a few things. Some I learned at Wharton, some I learned from life. One is I knew what I was good at, and that I wasn't a typical dean. Or when I became a CEO, I wasn't a typical CEO. Wasn't huge operational guy, which is what most people get chosen for these roles.
Mm-hmm.
or academic piece. In fact, for one of the jobs that I ended up getting at Jefferson, one of the chairs had ripped up my CV. And when I was very successful and we became friends, I said, There's a tree ripped up my CV. He said it was nothing personal. I just any ones that were thin enough that I could rip up, I just did that. But I mean, compared to the folks that have done 750 mostly minor papers, that was so. I think the things I learned were one of my Wharton professors used to say, you should always have 5 people under you that think they can do a better job than you, and 3 that are right.
Mm-hmm.
So if any of folks listening to this are aspiring leaders in healthcare, that's a mistake a lot of people make. They like to surround themselves with people that they feel comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
They don't like to surround themselves with people that are much better at what they're not good at. And I think I took the almost opposite approach. I hired some of the top academic people, some of the top operational people, and you could argue if anything went wrong, it'd be easy to, for one of them to say, hey, this guy's probably looks more like a dean than Steve does. But I had enough confidence that, we would do so well that they would just become part of the team. And in most cases, that was true. So that was one. The second thing was what I learned at Apple was sort of the Steve Jobs approach to think about what's going to be obvious 10 years from now and do it today. And in almost every job I took, that's what I did. And I didn't care that people thought that was stupid. We invested $40 million in telehealth in 2014.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that was like, that was like teaching, creationism, to an academic community. Like, are you crazy? Like, that's just throwing money away. Telehealth.
Never going to happen.
But yeah, it's just a nice fringe idea, but who's going to do that? And, it's not that I predicted the pandemic or anything. It's just that I recognized 10 years from now, there's no way everybody's going to come to an office or a hospital,
Mm-hmm.
right? When I was at Apple, Steve Jobs said, I don't want to spend the next 10 years going from 2% to 4% of a commoditized market in computers and operating systems. So I'm still going to make computers and operating systems, but we're going to lead what's the digital lifestyle. Back then, what's the digital lifestyle? I don't know, but we're going to lead it. And that's sort of how I looked at Jefferson and USF. The old math was inpatient revenue, outpatient revenue, in-person tuition, NIH funding. The new math was going to be these strategic partnerships with digital health and health at any address companies. Now, that wasn't obvious
Mm-hmm.
Back in either 2004 when I started at USF or 2013 when I started at Jefferson. But it differentiated us, Ohad, right? It differentiated me from a place like Penn. It was always going to be top 10 in NIH funding and top 10 in the U.S. News and World Report. And at Jefferson, I said, hey, if the head of the NIH comes to Philadelphia, he's probably going to come to Penn.
Mm-hmm.
I hope when somebody like Hemant Taneja or Ben Horowitz comes to Philadelphia, they'll come to Jefferson. And that's pretty much exactly what happened.
And that, maybe that's actually a good segue into the latest and current iteration of your unplanned career path, which is you're a venture capitalist. And basically you built a health system in the mold of a venture capitalist thinking 10 years ahead. And it will dovetail very closely to the topic of disruption, which we'll get to in a moment, or anti-disruption maybe. Maybe talk to us about that last step now. So you've been extremely successful scaling Thomas Jefferson, great academic career, great career as an administrator, scale builder, changer from within. And now what is the interest to collaborate with Bay Area, Silicon Valley, General Catalyst VC fund?
Yeah, well, yeah, and delivered a couple thousand babies, I might add. But I think, one of the things I learned early on was as healthcare technology starts to literally, or healthcare catches up with the technological revolution is probably a better way to put it. There's going to be a lot of money made. And I had written an article, back in, maybe 12 years ago when I was still at USF. I won't mention the company, but I had been their main advisor. USF had been their strategic partner. We were their only partner when they started, really helped them create the company. And about 2 years later, I get a call from their founder and CEO, Steve, I want to take you out to dinner. And I said, well, why? Well, we couldn't have done it without you personally. We couldn't have done it without USF. I mean, literally, we wouldn't be here today. I said, well, great. Why dinner? Well, we just got valued at $800 million. So that better be a hell of a dinner. And he said, well, no, I'm also going to send you and your staff for fleeces. So I think my article was called, I'm Never Getting Fleeced Again.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got to Jefferson and we built the largest health system in Philadelphia, and I met Hemant and I started, met the folks from A16Z and others. I started to say, look, I want to be part of this revolution. I don't ever want to go to HIMSS again and have 28, 30-year-olds tell me how, if I buy their product, I'm going to transform healthcare. if it's good enough for my enterprise and it's transformative enough, I want to be part of it. And, if it's early. So we were one of the, initial partners with Livongo. I got to meet Hemant, and as I said, Hemant said, you're sort of the opposite of our unscaling strategy on your hospital side, but everything you're talking about, we resonate with. And we wrote a book together that was sort of a takeoff on Unscale, which was about their investments in Airbnb, Warby Parker, and Stripe. And it was called Healthcare, a manifesto for health assurance. And there were really three important tenets on healthcare. One was traditional healthcare ecosystems and VCs can actually work together, right? So Comure and Strongline and some of these companies around like nurse safety, for example, we co-developed. So it became another source of revenue for Jefferson. We got to invest a little bit, but we also were able to gain some equity co-developing. I'm a big fan of that. If you're going to be part of the growth of the company, so we were a customer and we were a co-developer. And that was great for Jefferson and great for GC. I think the second part of healthcare is that, we need to literally go from a model of how do you define your health system being where the sickest people go, right? If you came to my office in 2021, had a big sign that said, I hope 5 years from now, when Elon Musk brings people from Mars and they say, where's Jefferson? You can't define that. I mean, Jefferson partnering with General Catalyst, Jefferson on my iPhone, Jefferson at 12 micro hospitals. Oh, the place where really, really sick people go. I think that's still at 10 to 1. And then I think the third part of it for those in the audience that are, sort of those tech entrepreneurs, it's really important for entrepreneurs to understand what frontline providers go through. We've spent 40 years, and I'm part of it, lying to physicians and nurses that technology would make their life easier, starting with the epidemic, that we're going to spend all this money on the EMR, but it's going to make your life so much easier. Not that it didn't do some good things, but generally, I think most physicians would say up till this point, that hasn't been the case. So those were the three things that really led to what's now General Catalyst's whole health assurance thesis, was the book that we wrote together. And, after almost 9 years at Jefferson, and I just had the opportunity to say, it'd be fun that time at age 68 to hang out with those 28-year-olds and actually, really be the other side of that. And I think I came at a good time because it was right when that big change came from, if you had AI in your title, by definition, you're worth $1 billion. So you had to be scalable and sustainable. So I went from being wise grandpa here to like that guy, Mr. Miyagi in Karate Kid, that, that could sort of help them on. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's been great for me working with, Hemant, Chris, Holly, Elena, and the team on the one hand, but I also think it's been great for some of the young founders to have access to me and really say, so how's the CEO of a health system going to think about that? And that's been predominantly my role.
I can really connect to that from where I sit now, which is here in Canada, I find there's a fundamental aversion to industry and healthcare because we have such a high ethos. I think of what was built here initially as an amazing healthcare system that was really publicly funded, single payer, and a big source of pride for Canadians. And as kind of the challenges have continued to evolve, we've stayed true to that ethos, even though it's not, of course, 100% public funded and hasn't been for a very long time. And yet, as a result, it's a lot harder to find room for collaboration between industry and government. And I think your story of how you move from a health system that was already thinking industry and how do we invest and how do we foster an ecosystem of companies that can grow and also help us be more successful as a health system, and then kind of, moving on to be a venture capitalist is actually a very linear move. And I think in Canada, that would be a much more difficult move. And it's something that I'm always thinking about is like, how do we break that mold, that rut that we're kind of stuck in, that the divide between industry and government or industry and the provider world is so profound. And like, how do we bridge that? Yeah. And the US has economic incentives maybe to do so, but you've done it individually as well.
I think it's equally difficult and different. I think, I just spent about a week in United Kingdom looking at the job that they're looking for, Chief Transformation Officer for the NHS. So I know the NHS system is different than the Canadian system. I think, the opportunities there are unbelievable, when you think about their Palantir deal and that kind of thing. But, bureaucracy, fragmentation, and inertia get in the way. In the United States, it's really the fact that there's all these competing incentives, right? I mean, the New York Times just did a front page article on pharmacy benefit managers, in the US. I mean, it's almost ridiculous of the layers from when a drug gets, manufactured to when it gets to a PBM to when it gets to, the pharmacy to when it gets to the insurer. And literally every one of them adds a component to it. And then you have the insurers that own PBMs. CVS owns both pharmacies, and then they create GPOs. And all that does is add layers. It's the exact opposite of where every other sector has gone. Amazon delayered stuff, right?
Stripping out complexity.
Yeah, Airbnb delayered stuff. And here, literally, so we don't have a healthcare system in the United States for people. We have a healthcare system for people who have shares in United Healthcare. We have a healthcare system for people who have shares in Merck or J&J. We have a healthcare system for people who have shares in HCA. We have a healthcare system for people who have shares in, in the PBMs. And so we really get what we've created. And that's why there is so much fragmentation. Whereas you folks have more aligned incentives that are more patient driven, but generally, it's hard to get government to get out of its way and really partner I'm on President Biden's National Board of Education, and I just get to see, both the good of government being mission oriented, but the difficult of actually getting something done.
Well, just before we started recording, we were talking about this concept of disruption, and it's kind of a catchphrase that I think both of us maybe talked about the fact that we don't love, because there's something great about breaking a mold that is challenging, but there's also some breakage, there's some damage in that. And I think we have to be very sensitive to that when we think about healthcare, right? Because like you said, clinicians aren't resistant to change. They're just trying to do what's right for the patient. They have the attention span of a gnat to devote to technology or disruption, with air quotations, because they've got a patient and a procedure in front of them. And so maybe talk to me about that, about like, how do you think about disruption, or maybe the anti-disruption, kind of like changing from within in a way that isn't as damaging or doesn't create as much breakage?
Yeah, I had a chance to really spend some time thinking about this because, a few years ago, Modern Healthcare does their most influential group. I was like number two. I think President Trump was number one. I was number two in this class of disruptors. And, I was really proud of that, until somebody gave me the definition of disruptor. And, so actually, because I had done so many interviews and podcasts around that designation, I finally came up to a realization. My brother was a lot older and more athletic than I was. So disruption is him kicking down my not very good sandcastle. Okay, that doesn't really do anything. Non-disruptive creation is him telling me how lousy my sandcastle is, getting rid of some of the layers of it and then helping me build a better one. So, I mean, to me, every book I've written, and I've written 6 of them, is sort of disruptive, funny about what's wrong with the American healthcare system. But the last one I did, I tried to really look at what is the better sandcastle. So I think, the examples I'd give is, Uber and Lyft are great, in essence, transformations. They disrupted the way things were done before. In a way, probably good disruption, because if you've gotten in a taxi in our country, you can actually now do it with your iPhone and stuff. So taxis are marginally better, but really killed people that had taxi medallions and that kind of thing. Example like Sesame Street is a perfect example of non-disruptive creation. People still read to their kids at night, kids still watch television, but create a whole new thing that then was able to expand. So to me, I look for those companies that are going to literally make things easier for patients, easier for providers, and not necessarily have everybody fight them because it's tearing down something that currently exists. We have a company that I'm on the board of that General Catalyst supports called Paradigm, which is democratizing clinical trials. Mm-hmm. It's a really good example of, if you have unlimited money in our country and you have a cancer, you can fly out to a Memorial Sloan Kettering or Houston, MD Anderson. But if you can't, you might not have access to that trial. It's not because your oncologist isn't qualified. It's just the infrastructure isn't there. So we're democratizing that. I mean, that's a good example. It'll be good for the pharma companies because they'll be able to do their clinical trials or easier. It'll be good for oncologists because they'll be able to get clinical trials to their patients. It'll actually be good for the MD Andersons and Memorial Sloan Ketterings because they'll get the right patients to them, not just people that because they couldn't get something there. So those are the kind of things that I'm at this point in my career trying to look at with GC. There's a company, both us and A16Z have invested in called Hippocratic AI, which is looking at Rachel, the AI nurse. How, and it's again not to get rid of nurses. It's how do we start to create AI nurses that can do some of the things that nurses don't want to or don't have time to do. I was on the advisory board of IBM Watson, and IBM Watson was going to get rid of radiologists. You fast forward to a GC company called AI Doc, which has said, hey, radiologists are wonderful people, really smart, and they're right about 96% of the time. AI Doc can be their partner behind the scenes to make them right 100% of the time.
Right. It's
so to me,
right?
Yeah.
AI will not replace radiologists. Radiologists that use AI will replace radiologists that don't.
Yeah. And I was on a panel and one of the people said technology replaces 80% of what doctors do. And my comment was any doctor that could be replaced by a computer probably should be. And I think we need to in medical schools create future physicians that are better humans than the robots, not better robots than the robots. And that means not just choosing students based on science, GPA, MedCats, and organic chemistry grades.
Well, I love the lens that you bring to that, coming from your clinical background, having delivered thousands of babies, being an academic, being an administrator, because I think in terms of advice to medtech entrepreneurs, people in my seat, that's something that we really have to connect to, is trying to see the world through the eyes of our customers, our users, and separately from that also our buyers. I think EMRs are a good example. Like you said, have they really made the lives of clinicians better? And I think many clinicians will say, no, they haven't. I'm busy charting this thing. Well, I want hands on the patient. I want eye contact with a person. This is not the reason I went into practice. And so creative disruption maybe is an AI that now is really a tool that's ambient, right? Which is, I know, what some of your portfolio companies are working on to be able to avoid that disintermediation that happens when technology gets in between the clinician and the patient. And I can add, I think I had an epiphany in our world of handheld ultrasound to really realize that for many clinicians, bringing this modality, a pocket-sized imaging system into their hands, into their practice, into their pocket, made them much more satisfied, much more complete as a clinician, because they could eliminate that legacy referral pattern to get a radiology opinion on something they felt I can just can get my hands on and get my brain wrapped around myself. So I think that's such
that was
a message to our listeners.
That was a game changer in obstetrics, right? I mean, the ability to have that as an extension of your hand, it's not an either or. So yeah, I think what you guys have done is just a really, really great, advance.
Yeah, and I try to think, to your point around disruption of, radiology and cardiology will continue to have big cart-based machines in the basement of the hospital because they're highly useful. They've got great image quality. They're operated by a sonographer. But, could we move this to being from kind of a medical device that's a shared asset that you have to book or wheel a patient to your point, to an extension of the clinician? Like I'm a cyborg now, and my right hand has an ultrasound in it that just allows me to see inside a patient's body instead of just palpating or holding a stethoscope, this 200-year-old technology, to their chest.
That's why I like the healthcare at any address moniker as opposed to healthcare at home or healthcare at this. It's just, it's your health is the reason I'm here. And wherever we can make that more convenient for you and for me is because that's what Amazon did. When I give talks to health system CEOs, I say, I want to be Target and Walmart. When Amazon basically disrupted retail, there were some folks that, oh my God, nobody's ever going to the store again. If you remember in my country, there was Circuit City, they went all E and they couldn't compete with Amazon. And there were other folks that said, what a stupid fad. People love the day after Thanksgiving, parking 10 miles away and fighting over Cabbage Patch dolls, think Sears and Pennies. Target and Walmart said, we're going to be really good at what we do, but we have to compete with Amazon in their world also. And, if somebody has pancreatic cancer, I mean, Jefferson had probably the top pancreatic cancer surgeon in the world. They didn't care what our digital strategy was. They didn't care, what how big our TV was, they wanted to go see Dr. Yo. But for the 97% of people in Philadelphia, or where I live now in Miami and New York, that don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm a patient, they wake up in the morning and say, I'm a person that would like to be able to thrive without healthcare getting in the way. And if you can help me, health system, or you can help me, tech entrepreneur, that's fine. But it's about me. And I want to be able to connect and have human relationships when I need it. I want to be able to thrive without having to think about it. So if you can be my invisible friend, great. And if you can tell me when I need to see somebody in an urgent care center or an office or an ER or a hospital, but I don't want that to be the default. And I also don't want you to I also don't want to have 27 point solutions because you happen to think of that point solution for your tech company that I have to put together. And that's the problem now a little bit with wearables, right? I got an Oura Ring, I got an Apple Watch, literally anything that can become seamless. My car, gets better care than I do because it's sending continuous signals. And when I got back to Miami just a couple of days ago, when I turned it on, it said, hey, Steve, while you were away, my right front passenger tire got a little low. Could you fill it up, right? But meanwhile, I'm going to have a physical 2 weeks from now. They're going to do all these tests, and they're going to tell me what I should do for the next 18 months. I'm 70 years old. They have no idea what I should do for the next 18 months. So, so the key is going to be, and my one suggestion, if anyone cares, from the tech world, is the chances that your point solution is going to become the next, $10 billion company in 2024 and beyond isn't there. So how are you strategically partnering, across several point solutions to create something either I, as a health system CEO, or the patient can't do without? And, a lot of the work that I try to do with GC and other places I work with are, not that you guys even have to merge, but if you put this together with this and this, you've created a real, for example, workforce transformation company. But none of you by yourselves are truly transforming the workplace.
I think that's such an important message, right? Because again, we tend to think of problems through the lens with which we're seeing them. And to your point, like that's an accumulation of point solutions, and it really does entail broader thinking and maybe the eyes of the clinician, more importantly, the eyes of the patient to see it in its entirety. Do you think that's where it's going? Kind of as we start to bring our podcast to a close today, we talked about how health systems have transformed, clinicians are transforming, care is moving from conventional care settings to new care settings. Is it ultimately going into the hands of the patient? Are we really getting towards patient-centered care and that more tools and more of that lens, again, that avoidance of the 18-point solution, but rather the holistic perspective from the patient's view is what's going to be at the forefront of healthcare?
Yeah, look, and I think that is the one area it's going to be tougher, certainly for physicians my age, but generative AI is really going to change that. I mean, we used to, laugh at Dr. Google when patients would come in with, these things, because most of that information was ridiculous. But, with where Gen AI is heading, I mean, I've tried it, I have a few, very interesting, medical issues. And, I went on Perplexity and, or a couple of the others. And, I mean, they're looking up the New England Journal of Medicine and they're looking up the American Journal of Rheumatology. And, they're coming up with a sort of a coherent, at least pros and cons of different treatments that are every bit as good as what I would get from my specialist, and certainly better than what I get from a direct-to-consumer advertising, on from a pharma company on Morning Joe or whatever. So I think that from a both health system and technology point of view, we have to recognize that Gen AI will be increasingly used by consumers. So that's number one. I think number two, founders have to become a lot more realistic and a lot more expansive in who their competitors are. When I was Jefferson's CEO, I probably had 100 incoming, and I would talk to 10 people probably a month. And I remember one person came in and said, he started the deck very seriously. We are the only, I said, no, you're not. He said, well, you're not listening to me. I said, let me start again. We're the only. After about the third one, he said, you don't even know what I'm about to say. I said, I do know what you're about to say. You're not the only, whatever you're about to tell me. So you're starting off lying to me, because if you're going to tell me about your RPM or your RPA, you're not the only, right? So, and then the third thing I'd say to them is spend more time customizing your approach and recognizing that there is not one way health systems run. One of my most important people in my cabinet doesn't exist in most healthcare systems. It was my CMSMIO, the Chief Medical Social Media Information Officer, a guy named Austin Chang, who now works for Medtronic. He's a TikTok darling. He probably did more for us as far as getting patients to understand what we're doing. So literally, if you came to Jefferson and you said, well, I need to talk to the CEO, the CFO, the CIO, that might have been the wrong 3 people to talk to. Mm-hmm. So whereas in most places that might be there. So I think some of it is spending more time really being honest where you're differentiated and spending more time recognizing the place you're trying to sell to, what's their needs, and what do they really want, not how can you sell what you're already selling.
Steve, that's got me excited. It's all we're going to have time to cover today. But before we wrap up, if people want to keep up with you, where should they go?
Pretty easy. Klasko.com has all my different Insta and X stuff. I'm at Klasko. I'm on LinkedIn. As I told you, when you're 70 years old and you've been a healthcare leader for 40 years, you're not hard to find. Stephen Klasko, if anybody wants to email me, it's sklasko@generalcatalyst.com.
Steve, that was wonderful. You've given us a lot to chew on. I think your background is inspirational. And many people, again, in that chair have told us the story of how nothing is really by design. And it's so interesting to see those pathways and what are the key decision points that we all come up in our career and how they shape that outcome. And you've certainly had quite the journey and very also informative and instructional and thought-provoking around disruption and creation. I'm really grateful for the time we spent together today. And to all of our listeners, thank you for joining us to another episode of our podcast. That's a wrap.